Before I continue into the video, I just want to say, all views are my own. You know, I've done a little bit of research, but nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is 100% true. These are just views I have on, the new Trump's tariffs and things. So from what I'm able to see, Trump hopes to, reduce the trade deficit that the U.S. has with other countries by, putting tariffs on things from, foreign countries. And he hopes to do this by, making the Americans spend more money in the U.S. economy, so we get out of that trade deficit, because the Americans and the U.S. they spend more money on foreign countries, imports, rather than homegrown or U.S. local things. But there's so many problems with this. One of the problems with this is the U.S. greed. The U.S. has multiple companies that produce stuff, but Americans don't buy it. And why would that be? One of the major points of this would be because the quality isn't so great. Another important point of this would be labor laws. You're able to get better quality at a lower price. That's why so many of the companies that we buy from, clothing, shoes, and all of that, they're built overseas because they have lower labor laws and wages. So we're able to maximize our profits while getting some of the best quality. Another reason why Trump could be doing the trade deficit is because we're hurting ourselves by by putting ourselves more in debt and becoming too dependent on China. But what if this is something just that troubles our American pride, troubles the people that we are. I feel like there's so many wrong reasons with this. One of the reasons he's also doing this is to put America first, rather than doing a global cooperation through other countries and things. Making the America dollar better. Doing tariffs, because he believes that America should be first and we should be on top. Even though we're not the best exporter or importer anymore. That belongs to China and other distant Asian countries. Philippines, Vietnamese, China. Those countries have taken the lead in importing and building the things that we buy. Trump also hopes that with more U.S. American spending, we will get ourselves out of this debt, but it's not directly tied to it. I would say it's more as like a hurt now and maybe succeed later. We're hurting now because low American income houses, they won't be able to survive all the trade tariffs and things, and it won't help because it doesn't reduce the prices of homegrown things. It just becomes, the prices just become more closer to each other, and I think an important thing to this would just be to why one of the reasons that he's doing this. He's doing this because he believes that America should be first, but we're using the money for the wrong reasons. If we should if we should do this, why not just directly try to do it through loyalty. Importing trade services forcing people to buy homegrown stuff so they don't spend more on foreign imports and things like that. But if looking at the problem of Americans buying from foreign countries, well, why are they doing that? Going back to the point that I said about better quality and lower pricing, and that would interfere with Americans, because Americans, or the American companies that we buy from in here, they're doing half effort. For example, Nike. Nike's production has, fallen down. They don't have the same quality anymore, but they still have the same or higher prices, and that could be seen as greed. That's why other people are buying shoes from overseas, which are of the same quality or even better in some cases. I'd say America has become more of a consumerism country rather than constructing clothes, food, things like that. Yeah, we're still one of the biggest cotton growers, but what does that mean? And he hopes to. Another point why this is bad is because he's putting tariffs on raw materials, but that still directly affects us because there's only so much we can grow on our own before we have to buy from other people, regardless if there's no tariffs or not. We're still buying materials from other people, and we grab those materials from other people, and we're paying the tariffs for that, just for it to be assembled in America and called American grown. It still directly affects us because America is not one of the biggest one of the biggest I don't know the word, but they're not one of the biggest builders. They're not one of the biggest things like that. We could also say that the money that's here is not being used efficiently, for other things like improving education, improving wages, improving the way of life in America. Instead, he's trying to force it upon you that, you stop buying from foreign countries and stuff, and you focus more on American things because America is better, or America is the best. That's the ideal he's trying to spread. America doesn't have to rely on others to succeed. We can do it all by ourselves. That's what he hopes to do with these tariffs. But I'd say the money that we get from taxes and things like that, they're not being used beneficially. And instead of improving the American way, we're improving the American greed and consumerism that we have. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why he's putting tariffs on so many things, is because he hopes that it'll get us out of the trade deficit and out of the U.S. debt, which is I'm pretty sure trillions of dollars. But that's it would never work like that because the lower class, they would never make it. It's lower class failure for high systematic class uprise. They hope that the high classes will gain more from this than low classes will, but they don't realize that the low classes is a major part of society too, because that's the people who does the work for them. That's the people who generates the dollars for the high class people. And it's like a paradox equation, not exactly like equation, but it's like a paradox. We do one thing for the other thing, but when you really think about it, it's never going to work. It's not a good idea. And maybe I'm just blabbering about here, but I just it was something that I was thinking about the other day, and I just feel like it would never work because it's so poorly constructed on several cases. I can only say so much because I'm not the president. I don't have all these people thinking for me and having plans for me, but these are just my thoughts and what I think about how or some tips that that we can improve the way of life. So to basically sum this up, he's using tariffs so people stop buying foreign things and we invest more into U.S. economy. But the problem with that is that the U.S. is so far behind in advancement and all that. We've fallen out of the number one spot and building things and importing it to other people. I feel like something that could help this would be to invest in the U.S. economy without forcing people that spend their money on whatever they want to, because other people have better quality and lower prices, rather than buying the U.S. and feeding the high corporation greed. It's like something. It has something to do with loyalty. People right now, they feel as if they don't matter, and the people of higher power only care so much for you. You know, the only thing they care about is, you know, greed and, you know, deepening their pockets. You know, but that's it, it's only short term sighted. You know, there's I'm gonna do a short with all these points summarized and stuff, because I feel like this is a very important thing. You know, it could affect the way that lower class, you know, and maybe even middle class people live, because it's raising the prices of essentials, you know, that people need. And, you know, I just feel like there's many problems that is wrong with this. So yeah.